What's going on, everybody? Matt Bove here. We are joined by our friend Joe Biscaglia from The Athletic and Fritz Biscaglia, who I believe just had a 2-year-old birthday. Look at
He
him.
sure did.
He's so well behaved.
He sure did. He's a good boy. He just chills. He's loving this what's going on here. I think lots of time at home for us.
Yeah, so
Sure.
I would imagine when you're watching all of your film this time of year, Fritz is probably just sitting on your lap, right?
Yeah, more or less. Or he's out looking for dogs or birds or squirrels or something and fake growling at them. Yeah, that's pretty much the life of Fritz.
Yeah, doesn't seem like a bad life right now. How is it for you? What's going on? What's new?
Not much. Not a lot has changed for me because it's draft time of year. So it's like a lot of just watching prospects and trying to figure out who might fit the bills and everything like that. So not a ton has changed, but certainly once we get into the time where there's no workouts that are usually there, that's when things really start to change from an NFL perspective. But yeah, it's good just keeping busy and seeing all the free agents and seeing how they all kind of meld together with what Brandon Beane's vision is.
I'm not exaggerating. So they make the Diggs trade at, I don't know, 10:30 or something. By 11 o'clock, I'm sitting there in the newsroom thinking, oh no, what is Joe going to do without a first-round pick to study for the Bills? I actually thought about you. So I know that you're already probably on the second round. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But just big picture, off-season, how do you think they've done so far?
Yeah, I think they've definitely underscored what they're best at, and I think Brandon Beane doesn't have any illusions of what makes them into the team that they are right now, and that's their defense. And they've gone forward with really just honing in on finding pieces to add to the defensive line that will help bring about that all-encompassing, overwhelming defensive effort that maybe they were missing in spots last year, whether it be run defense or a pass rush, a better pass rush, a more consistent pass rush. And I think even though they didn't really add any speed options to their pass rush, they gave themselves a lot of versatility to kind of work from. And when you look at Mario Addison, he over his time in Carolina last year, I mean, he lined up at both defensive end spots. He lined up at defensive tackle on pass rushing downs. He lined up as an outside pass rushing outside linebacker. He lined up as a 5 technique defensive end in 3-man front. So this is a guy with a lot of versatility. And the same thing kind of goes for Vernon Butler and Quentin Jefferson. All of these different guys have it can meld together into this one, and it's going to be very interesting to see how they approach pass rushing downs. I've got a piece coming up on The Athletic about that exact topic, where I went back and researched everything that the Bills have done over the last 3 years and trying to figure out what's next without Lorenzo Alexander. And I think a lot of it is by committee and trying to establish more of a consistent pass rush, both up the middle and from the edges.
We haven't had a chance to talk to Stefon Diggs yet, but we have talked to Brandon Beane and Josh Allen kind of about what they think his impact will be. What do you think his impact will be on the offense?
Oh, I love watching that guy. I mean, going through and watching every single one of his snaps in 2019, whew, that is fun. And I'm a wide receiver snob, and his route running is just so much fun to watch, the way that he sets up defenders. And John Brown does a little of this, but he doesn't do it at the same velocity as Stefon Diggs does. And when Diggs is going into his breaks, he's got the defenders on a string. And the way that he sets them up, and he has just these quick feet that can get out of his breaks and gain, upwards of 2-3 yards of separation on a 5-yard comeback. That's just how good he is and how good he can be. And when the ball's in the air, he attacks it. Can come down with contested catches, and he can catch the ball off his body. So he's very good at plucking away. They call it the hashtag catch radius. He's just a lot of fun, and he might be able to help develop Josh Allen with the deep ball, even though I think that's a little bit of an overblown thing. Where he's going to be most effective, it will be in those intermediate areas where he can gain these windows of separation. Because if there's one thing that Josh Allen struggles with right now outside of the deep ball accuracy, it's throwing his guys open, throwing with anticipation. He did a better job of it last year. He needs to do an even better job of it in 2020. But the one way to alleviate that is getting a guy who can gain separation just with his routes and then with the quickness on top of it. So when you add a weapon like Diggs who can do just that, then you're setting your quarterback up for success in the coming season.
I was having this conversation the other day with a couple people. Now that we know that the draft is going to be done completely virtually and kind of all the obstacles that they're going to have to jump through, I was making the argument that I think the Bills actually have an advantage here just because the front office has been together and because we know they've been prepared for this for a while. Do you think that's fair? Or is that could that be said maybe for every front office?
I mean, I think they have more of an advantage than maybe some of the newer staffs. They certainly haven't had too much turnover. Really, the only turnover from the front office that they've had was when Brian Gaine went for like 4 seconds down to Houston to become their GM until Bill O'Brien got him fired. So that was probably the only kind of turnover they had. But I think Bean has a lot of trust in the guys all around him, whether it be Joe Shane, Dan Morgan, Terrence Gray, all of those guys, and trying to figure out who to draft. I mean, they've done a ton of the work already. They already had a plan going into it. I mean, they probably didn't know they were going to trade for Stefon Diggs, but in the event that they did make a splash like that, they had some plans for what they're going to do in the second round, third round, things like that. So I think they'll be just fine. I also think it's a little bit, this whole uproar about doing the draft virtually and not doing these in-person visits and anything like that. I actually think it's going to have a reverse effect where teams are going to draft smarter because there's not going to be as much of an emotional attachment to guys that they meet. Yeah, and talk to for 3 to 4 hours. There's not going to be like, oh, we got to add this guy. That's not the case anymore. They're just gonna watch the tape, trust the tape, and draft from their scouts' intel.
This is a loaded question. You know that I've asked you a lot of loaded questions over the years. At 54, what makes the most sense for the Bills? Because I know they probably want to take the best player available, but it kind of feels like they could go anywhere.
Well, I think there's a little bit of a misconception with what best player available means in terms of what Brandon Beane and his staff does. Best player available is not the overwhelming, oh, hey, if it's a quarterback, just take the quarterback and go from there. I think with the proper term for how they do it is need meets value. NMV, we'll call it. Because how they set up their board is not just totally based upon talent upon talent upon talent. Their needs are also influencing their own very board. So it could be best player available on their board all day long and still be a need because odds are the need is going to inflate who they end up drafting, which makes sense in a lot of different senses. So I think there's a handful of positions they could probably go to. I look at certainly interior offensive line because I thought what Brandon Beane had to say about Cody Ford and how he hinted that he was probably going to be a tackle this year. I think that's going to be influential to the draft. Edge rusher is something they could always add some more youth to and speed to off the edge, and certainly they could do it with Trent Murphy's contract. I think the big nickel position is one that is vastly underrated in how they're approaching this draft because they don't have it at this moment, and it's something that Sean McDermott has been actively trying to add to his defense for 3 years now, and he hasn't been able to find it. So I think those positions. You can also chuck cornerback in there, maybe running back. Although I'm less in camp of running back in the second round, and then I'd even throw a wide receiver in there as well. John Brown's 30, Cole Beasley's in his 30s. I mean, they're going to have to plan for life after those two guys, and adding a wide receiver to develop in the background behind Diggs and Brown, not the worst idea.
What are a couple names that people should be doing their research on? Because I just read your most recent mock draft with the Bills and talked about the big nickel position. But what are a couple names of people that that people should kind of do their homework on?
Yeah, if you're looking at big nickel in that second round range, there's two guys. It's funny. I just was watching their tape from the Senior Bowl before we started taping. Kyle Duggar from Lenoir-Rhyne, who basically what I wrote down in my notes, let me see if I can find it, he is on a constant seek and destroy mission. With whenever he finds the ball, he just goes and tries to take the dude out, and that is definitely he plays with a lot of explosiveness, and maybe his instincts need to be a little bit better. But I think if you're putting him in a zone coverage and allowing him to kind of maybe even be a blitzing option off the edge, that adds a different element to your defense. But where he maybe lacks a little bit in his hip fluidity and coverage, Jeremy Chin of Southern Illinois kind of makes up for that. I mean, this is a guy who took reps at the Senior Bowl going up against the wide receivers as a cornerback in one-on-ones and actually looked like he belonged. But if you're putting him in that big nickel role, can play coverage for you. Maybe not as great of a tackler, not as explosive as Duggar, but still someone with a lot of speed and can definitely close down the area between himself and the ball carrier or the quarterback really quickly. So those are the two guys at big nickel that I think are in the conversation. After those two guys, pretty large drop off, and which is why I'm tending to think if there's a guy like that there, then maybe Brandon Beane might bite at that.
People love mock drafts this time of year. I totally get that. I totally understand why. You'd love to find the player that you can start to do the research on and get to know more about them. There's been a lot of mock drafts out there, and I'm not just basing this off of yours, but maybe other people's as well. Is there anybody who maybe was projected that the Bills could be interested at 22 that might slip and fall to 54? Because it seems like that would
I think you would probably look at wide receivers in that spot. I mean, T. Higgins is a guy from Clemson I'm not super high on, but I could see why a team would appeal to that because of how well he runs for a big body. Doesn't really win a lot of contested catches, which is kind of a thing for me. And I don't love his footwork, but at that point in the draft, if you're drafting with someone with potential, then maybe that's someone. Brandon Ayuk from Arizona State, who seems to be on that first round, second round cusp right now. I love him. I've got him rated way higher than T. Higgins. And I think he should be a first round pick, but if he's not, and if people are a little thrown off by his core muscle surgery that he just had, then, that's to the benefit of whoever's drafting him and then developing him. So maybe those two guys, but really I can't see a host of other players dropping down to that point, because once you get past 32, or even like the 40 range, there's probably a little bit of a drop off, but at that point, you're still getting a good player, a solid player, and one that you're going to believe in pretty heartily once, no matter where they end up drafting, because, I'm not ruling out the fact that Brandon Beane might just move up from 54 if he is feeling a certain way about getting a player on his team.
Is it fair to assume that whoever you draft in the second round should probably make an immediate impact, maybe with the one exception being wide receiver because of the way the roster is built?
No, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think they would like it to be, but I don't think they're going to force it. They're in a position now where they have a roster that's deep enough to where they can withstand a second or third round pick not being able to contribute right away. It's not to say that it wouldn't immediately help them if they could. It's just more of a, okay, see where this player's at rather than trying to force the issue, because if he's not ready, then that's just bad news for everybody. And it makes the player look bad. It makes the team look bad. And you're better off trying to help him learn in the background. So you would like it. But it's not necessarily let's say they drafted a big nickel, and like we were talking about, and you have just the opportunity to get him out there on third downs, or maybe just get his feet wet a little bit before really letting him go as a 3-down linebacker, or taking over for Taron Johnson at the nickel spot. You can control what he's best at right now, and then help him improve in the background as he's learning from Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, all of these different, Matt Milano, Tremaine Edmonds, all of these different guys. Like edge rusher would be another perfect example of this. You can have a player be within the rotation, getting about 35% of snaps, but he's not trusted or not depended upon to take the whole load of the defensive end and be this impact player right away. I think that's a great opportunity for success, especially when your first pick isn't until the late second round.
Final question for you. Take Stefon Diggs out of it. What is your favorite move that the Bills have made since the start of the new league year? What player do you think makes the biggest impact, I guess, in the shortest amount of time?
See, it's weird because I think all the guys besides Diggs are just role players. So I don't know that I do have a favorite one. I think the one that gives them the most flexibility is probably Addison, just because you can line him up everywhere. But I also think he's just a slight upgrade to Shaq Lawson. I don't think it's like a super big deal that they signed him and let go of Shaq Lawson. I think the depth of the defensive line is going to improve. I think Vernon Butler is probably equal to Jordan Phillips. But all that said, because Vernon Butler's here and Jordan Phillips isn't here, Ed Oliver is going to take the lion's share of snaps, which is a huge upgrade over Jordan Phillips in my mind. And then Quentin Jefferson is going to help the defensive end rotation and certainly be able to kick inside as well. So it's more just rotational depth guys, and it's not a very sexy free agent class. I know everyone wants that thing, but Stefon Diggs was the big ticket, and no matter how much Addison and Norman and Butler and Jefferson and AJ Klein play, it's just they're trying to figure out what made them good last year and then improve upon it in 2020 and hope that the pass rush comes to play and a better run defense, and of course hoping that Josh Allen takes the next step.
Thank you for doing this. Where can everybody find your stuff?
At theathletic.com or on my Twitter page over at Joe Buscaglia. Silent G in there. It's tricky. Us Italians with the silent G's. Fritz doesn't have a silent G, though.
Thanks, Joe Buscaglia.
Thanks, buddy.